Warning, the Mad Lad is at it again. Do not play this deck. Playing this deck may cause confusion and surprise your friends so much that they pass out. The Mad Lad is not responsible for such occurrences. You have been warned. Do not play this deck. Even though it's extremely budget friendly except for one card, with every other card being underneath $1. Do not play this deck. Deck list link in the description. You have been warned. Now back to the episode. So a commander that I've always wanted to build around, and one that I want to build around in a somewhat different way, is Amoti, Celebrant of Bounty. Amoti is a 3/1 Naga Druid for 3 green blue, so a Simic commander, but not your typical one. This one has Cascade, and it says spells you cast with converted mana cost 6 or greater have Cascade. Now, cascading means that when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library to exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost, but the exile cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So that's a pretty good effect, and again, one that differs from your usual Simic, card advantage plus, land ramp, etc, etc, etc. But it is doing something different, and many players out there enjoy building around this concept of, big spells plus extra value, cascading. But with this commander, I've always wanted to go in a different direction. A build that is so off the wall, out of every single Amoti deck on EDH Rec, no deck is doing this. But because of the way that we are building this deck and the card that this deck is built around and what we want to do with it, we have to play with certain restrictions. Because with this commander, we want to hit one specific card every single time we cast it. And that's literally all we care about. We care about hitting that one card, and so because of that, we need to ensure that every other card in the deck has a converted mana cost of 5 or greater. So because of that, then, we are guaranteed to hit that card with that Cascade. Now, because of this restriction, and because of that card's converted mana cost, well, we can also utilize Karuga the Macro Sage as our companion, just because, well, why not? Karuga has Companion. Your starting deck contains only cards with converted mana cost 3 or greater and land cards. Again, just because of the way that we're building this deck, we automatically meet that restriction, so yeah, why not utilize Karuga as a companion as an extra card? And of course, Karuga says when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control a converted mana cost 3 or greater. Most of the time, that's not going to be all that relevant for this deck, but we'll take it. Why not? Regardless though, now let's move on and talk about the card that this entire deck is built around. And that card, of course, is the Golden Pig of this deck, the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Shape Anew. Shape Anew is a sorcery for 3 and a blue, and it says the controller of target artifact sacrifices it, then reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal an artifact card. That player puts that card onto the battlefield, then shuffles all other cards revealed this way into their library. So this is basically a polymorph effect for an artifact. And again, because every single other card in this deck is going to have a converted mana cost of 5 or greater, or again, they're lands, we are going to be guaranteed to hit this every single time with our commander. So when we're ready and we decide to do that, well, we're going to be targeting one of our own artifacts. And of course, we'll talk about ways to actually make artifacts, because we can't include artifacts in this deck except for one. Because if we were to include a lot of artifacts in this deck, well, then we'd be hitting something random, and we definitely don't want to hit something random. We want this to hit a very specific card. So the goal of this deck is to cast your commander to cast this to cheat into play none other than Blightsteel Colossus. That's right, the true goal of this uncommon commander that is generally just built with a bunch of, high converted mana cost spells to give you some cascade value, is to actually just cheat Blightsteel Colossus into play. Because, of course, Blightsteel is an 11/11 Phyrexian Golem with Trample, Infect, and Indestructible, and it costs 12 mana. Which, of course, is a ton of mana, but instead of paying that, well, we're just going to be paying the 5 to cast our commander, to again cast Shape Anew, to get rid of one of our artifacts, to get this for free. Which then, of course, can just demolish our opponents with that Trampling, Infect, Indestructibility loveliness. On top of that, it also says if we put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle into its owner's library instead. Now, that can actually help us out, because if Blightsteel is in our hand, well, as long as we can discard it in some way, and one of those ways might actually just being, going to our end step with 8 cards in our hand, then we can actually get this into our graveyard. Which then, of course, shovels into our library so we can get access to it with Shape Anew. But again, chances that it actually gets into our hand during a game are pretty low, but just know that that is a backup plan just in case. But yeah, with this deck, we can get Blightsteel Colossus out as early as turn 4, so good luck, opponents. But now that we've talked about the goal of this deck and how we're planning to win with it, how do we actually get to this point? First up, let's talk about some ways to have an artifact on our side, starting with a card like Wave Sifter. Again, because of the restrictions on this deck where we have to hit Shape Anew, we can't have any card that has a converted mana cost of 4 or less. On top of that, because we want to guarantee that we hit Blightsteel Colossus every time with Shape Anew, we also can't utilize any artifacts in this deck. And that's why something like Wave Sifter is incredible in this deck. It's got an evoke cost of green-blue, so even though it costs 5, we can on turn 2 evoke this out. When it enters the battlefield, we get to investigate twice. So when we evoke it, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield, but we still get those clue tokens, so we're essentially paying 2 mana for 2 artifact tokens. And again, we just need 1 target for Shape Anew, so that is a fantastic way to set ourselves up. Our opponents might actually be able to help us out though when we utilize something like Vesuvian Shapeshifter. As it enters the battlefield or is turned face up, we may choose another creature on the battlefield. If we do, until it's turned face down, it becomes a copy of that creature, except it has at the beginning of your upkeep, you may turn this creature face down. And of course, it has a morph cost of 1 and a blue. So we can actually morph this out into play pretty early, just so that we can utilize it as a blocker if needed. But yeah, we can also just utilize it to clone one of our opponent's things. Most notably, we want to be cloning an artifact creature. So if an opponent, say, has something like a Psalm Simulacrum, we can just have this clone it, and now, yay, we get an artifact in play. But if we already have another way to get an artifact, well, we can also use Vesuvian Shapeshifter to copy Blightsteel Colossus once we get that into play, so having a second copy of Blightsteel Colossus can be quite fun, and very deadly. Next up though, there's Chromeshell Crab, which is a 3/3 crab beast which has morph for 4 and a blue, and it says, when it's turned face up, you may exchange control of target creature you control and target creature an opponent controls. So again, if an opponent has an artifact creature, we can swap Chromeshell Crab or another one of our creatures for that. Next up, how about some spells that can help us out with Gone Missing, Confirmed Suspicions, and Access Denied. Gone Missing says put target permanent on top of its owner's library and investigate, so we're going to make a clue token. And then Confirmed Suspicion is going to counter target spell and give us 3 clue tokens. And then Access Denied is also going to counter a spell and give us X Thopters, where X that spell's mana value. So these can be some great ways to interact on top of setting ourselves up for our plan. Speaking of interacting, we can just straight up take our opponent's things with cards like Dream Leash, Confiscation Coop, and Invoke the Winds. Dream Leash says enchant permanent. You may play Dream Leash only on a tap permanent you control enchanted permanent. So if an opponent has something, say, as simple as a mana rock that is tapped, well, now that's our mana rock that we can use however we need to. And then Confiscation Coop says choose target artifact or creature. You get 4 energy, that you may pay amount of energy equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. If you do, gain control of it. Basically, yeah, we're probably going to be stealing a mana rock that costs 4 or less from an opponent. Next up, Invoke the Wind says gain control of target artifact or creature, untap it. So yeah, this doesn't have that requirement of using energy or having, a permanent value. Regardless, it can be very effective. Moving on, there's Echo Storm, which is going to help us create a token that's a copy of target artifact. Again, in the vast majority of games of Commander, we're going to have a target for this. Just generally a mana rock will be sufficient for us. But we can also make our own tokens with something like Cultivator of Blades, which says Fabricate 2, so we can make 2 Servos when it comes into play, or Experimental Aviator, which can make 2 Thopters when it comes into play. Either way, again, we just need one of those for Shape Anew. Next up, we've got some more creatures that can help us out with Prosperous Pirates and Orchard Strider. Prosperous Pirates is going to make us 2 treasures when it comes into play, and Orchard Strider is going to make us 2 food tokens when it comes into play, and on top of that, we can actually basic land cycle this for 1 in a green earlier on. And speaking of lands, we can also ramp with a card with Hour of Promise, which can also get us our artifact in a way. It says search your library for the 2 land cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And again, this does not specify basic land, so we can get whatever lands we want, and some of our lands can help us make artifacts. One of my favorites and probably the most effective of these is Gingerbread Cabin. It has enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other forests, and when it enters the battlefield untap, you create a food token. So simply by having 3 other forests in play, we just get a food token when this comes into play, and that's all we need again for Shape Anew. And then Voldaren Estate can tap for a color, so we can pay 5 and tap to create a blood token. And then Mistress Factory can help us out in a different way. By paying 1, we can make into a 2/2 assembly worker artifact creature until end of turn. It's still a land. Regardless of how we go about doing it, each of these can be very effective when we need them. Speaking of which, we also have Gargoyle Castle and Foundry of the Consoles, which can each be sacrificed to make artifact creature tokens. By paying 5 and tapping Gargoyle Castle and sacrificing it, we create a 3/4 Gargoyle artifact creature token. And then Founder of the Consuls can be sacrificed in the same way to give us 2 Thopter. But again, obviously a fantastic ramp spell like Our Promise can really help us out and get us whatever land that we need. And speaking of ramp, ramping is quite interesting in this deck because, again, you need to utilize cards that have a converted mana cost of 5 or greater, so utilizing cards like Spring, Beanstalk Giant, and Greater Tanuki come in really handy. Spring says search your library for a basic land card, put on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library, and Mind is the aftermath half of that card, draw 2 cards. Again, with a split card like this one, the total converted mana cost is 9, so your commander is not going to hit it with Cascade. And then Beanstalk Giant has a converted mana cost of 7, but Fertile Footsteps can be cast for 2 and a green. And this one actually gets us the basic into play untapped. Next up, Greater Tanuki has a converted mana cost of 6, but we can channel it for 2 and a green, so we discard it and get a basic land into play tapped. Regardless, any of these can be fantastic turn 3 plays for us. But then at 4 mana, we've got Sheffet Monitor, which can be cycled for 3 and a green to go get a basic into play, and then Verdant Mastery, which we can actually just pay 3 and a green for its cost. And then we go get 4 basic land cards. 1 comes into play tapped under opponent's control, 2 of them come into play tapped under our control, and then the rest goes into our hand. So this might help an opponent out slightly, but it can get us to where we want to be quicker. Speaking of which, there's Johnsy, Oracle of Arcavios, which we're actually not going to be utilizing that side. We're going to be utilizing the back side with Journey to the Oracle. This is a sorcery for 2 green that says you may put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Then if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. So we can just dump a ton of lands into play to help get us to our end goal. And of course, we've got plenty of other cards to help us get us there too. First up, we're going to be utilizing a lot of cycling cards in this deck to help us get us to where we need to be. And first up, there's Step Through, which can bounce 2 target creatures back to those hands, but more importantly, it's got Wizard cycling for 2. So we can go get a wizard such as Johnsy to help ramp us. Or we can go get a wizard like Windcaller Avon, which is a bird wizard that we can cycle away for a blue. And actually, this one can be pretty relevant if we already have Blightsteel Colossus in play, because when we cycle it, we can give target creature flying until end of turn, which can help get Blightsteel Colossus through. Regardless, we've got 2 other cyclers for a blue with Strip Riverwinder and River Serpent. So we can cycle these cards away to dig down into those key pieces that we need to actually set ourselves up to win. And there's some other benefits of cycling that we'll talk about here in a bit, but first, let's go through some other cycling cards like Boon of the Wishgiver, which can either draw us 4 cards or we can cycle it for a 1. Frostveil Ambush can also be cycled for a 1, or we can tap down 2 creatures and they don't untap their controller's next untap step. And then there's Floodwaters, which can be cycled for 2, or we can use it to bounce 2 creatures. Next up, cycling for 2, we've got Sandbar's Serpent, Shimmerscale Drake, and Drifting Djinn, all of which are basically just creatures that we can cycle away. Moving on, Primebeck Escapee is yet another creature that can be cycled for 2. And then Lake Lane can be cycled for 2 as well, but we can also utilize it to control Enchanted Permanent. So again, in desperation, if we need to utilize this to take something again like an artifact for our Shape Anew, we can. Or, just our opponent's biggest threat too. And then Slipstream Eel is yet another simple creature that can be cycled for 1 in a blue. And speaking of which, we've got Jungle Weaver, Greater Sandworm, and Barkhide Mauler, which are all creatures that we are going to be cycling for 2. Finally, we've got Rampaging Hippo, again, cycle for 2, Monstrous Step, a spell that we can cycle for 2, and Crozin Tusker, which we can cycle for 2 and a green, but when we do cycle it, we go get a basic land into our hand. So yeah, we've got a ton of cyclers in this stack to get us to where we need to be. But we also have some other ways to dig down, and actually some spells that can generate some card advantage as well, with cards like Young Blue Dragon, Waker of Waves, and Muldrifter. Young Blue Dragon has the Adventurer's Sand Augury. By paying 1 in a blue, we scry 1, then draw a card. Waker of Waves has pay 1 in a blue, discard it, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, the other into your graveyard. And then Muldrifter can be evoked for 2 in a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, we draw 2 cards. Next up, though, with all those cards like Waker of Waves, Muldrifter, and all those cycling cards that are going to be hitting our graveyard, we can utilize them in a fantastic fashion with things like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. Treasure Cruise has Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard or casting this spell pays for 1, and it's going to help us draw 3 cards. And then Dig Through Time also has Delve, and it says look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them in your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So we can cast these for quite a bit cheaper, and they can help us really dig deep. Moving on, we've got Reason to Believe, which is actually a pretty funny card in this deck. It lets us scry 3 for just 1 mana, and then it's got Aftermath. Look at the top card of your library. You may put it onto the battlefield if it's a creature card. if you don't put it in your hand. So if we end up scrying with this and we end up seeing Blightsteel Colossus, well, we can set ourselves up to actually just cast Believe to get Blightsteel Colossus into play off the top of our library without having to use Shape Anew. So yeah, that can be quite the powerful interaction, but if we're not seeing Blightsteel Colossus, still scrying 3 can be very impactful. And speaking of impactful, Commit's going to put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library, second from the top, and then Memory is a wheel. Well, I should say, that type of wheel that makes everyone shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7. That kind of wheel. So maybe I should say more like a Time Twister effect. Regardless, Repudiate and Replicate is a fantastic card in this deck as well. Repudiate can counter target activated or triggered ability, and Replicate can actually create a token that's a copy of target creature we control, which can be quite funny when Blightsteel Colossus is that target. And finally, we've got All Run, but more likely we're going to be utilizing that backside early with Haka, Whispering Raven, a 2/3 flyer that has, when it deals counter to a player, return to its owner's hand, then scry 2. So we can get this down early for some extra card selection. Or, just as a blocker so that we can interact. And speaking of interaction, we're also going to be utilizing cards like Colossal Sky Turtle, Aether Snipe, and Mischievous Quanar. Colossal Sky Turtle has pay 2 and a green, discard it, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, or pay 1 and a blue, discard it, return target creature to its owner's hand. So it's a flexible card that can help us out in a lot of situations. Next up, Aether Snipe has Evoke for 1 blue, and when it enters the battlefield, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And then Mischievous Quanar can be turned face down by paying 3 blue. It's got a morph cost of 1 blue, and when it's turned face up, we copy target instant sorcery spell, and we can choose new targets for the copy. So yeah, this kind of interaction can help us out in a lot of situations. Moving on, we also have some adventure spells that can help us out with Psionic Pulse, Capsizing Wave, and Plant Tadpoles. Psionic Pulse on Sapphire Dragon says counter target non-creature spell. Capsizing Wave on Sword Coast Serpent says return target creature to its owner's hand. And Plant Tadpoles costs X blue, and it's going to tap down X target creatures they don't tap into their controller's next untapped steps. On top of that, when Illithid Harvester enters the battlefield, we turn any number of tapped non-token creatures face down, and they're 2/2 horror creatures. So this can be a great way to shut down some creatures while we're trying to set ourselves up. And finally, we've got Set Adrift, yet another Delve card, and this one's going to put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned earlier, every single card in this deck outside of one is less than $1. So the estimated cost of this deck is $78.05, and yeah, like $63 or so of that cost is actually all from Blightsteel Colossus. So if you already happen to have Blightsteel Colossus, or maybe if you want to proxy it, the deck can be incredibly budget friendly. On top of that, keep in mind that this estimated cost does include the cost of basic lands, so if you already have those, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, because of course those cards need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.